Well, hello again. Is the excitement building for Christmas yet? Have you heard the Christmas songs on the radio? People sometimes think that Christmas is all about presents and food, about crackers and carols, but it's so much more than that. Today, Benjamin meets a very recognisable figure. Shall we find out what happens? This is called the Man in Red. I wonder if you can guess who he is. On December the 6th, Benjamin opened the next door and saw a man in red. It grew darker and darker. The path to Bethlehem seemed immeasurably long to the little bear. Snowflakes blew in his face. He closed his eyes for a moment. He was so sleepy. The little bear yawned. Before him stood a man dressed in red with a large sack slung over his back, leading a donkey. "Hello there, little bear. My name is Nicholas. What are you doing out on such a cold night?" "I'm following the star to Bethlehem to see the child that will be born," muttered the bear. Nicholas smiled. "Then we are going the same way," he said, without waiting for a reply. He lifted the little bear onto his donkey. When they reached the village, the little bear saw children peering out of brightly lit windows. What are they waiting for, he wondered. Then he saw empty plates and boots in front of the doors. Nicholas opened his large sack. It was filled with apples, nuts and gingerbread. "Will you help me, little bear?" The little bear nodded and cheerfully passed out all the goodies. "Now the sack is empty," said the bear, disappointed. "We've given away everything." "And because we did, we are nearer to Bethlehem," replied Nicholas. The little bear rubbed his eyes. It was morning. The sun was shining. Next to him lay a small sack with a card that read, "For the little bear." "I'm glad the little bear got some goodies too," said Benjamin. "Yes," agreed Mother Bear, "but remember that sharing with others brings us closer to God." So once again, we're going to go through our Advent window and see who we put in our nativity scene. Wow, can you believe it's been 6 days since we started our Advent calendar? Each day we've added a different character into our nativity scene, and today we're going to have another look and see who our next character is in our magic stocking here. Let's have a look. It's a little boy and his father. You see, some people think that you have to be a certain age to know God, or that you can't possibly know God if you're over a certain age, or that you have to believe when you're young but not when you're old, and it's all the same, and these ideas that actually God is only for a certain group of people. But the reality is that actually God loves us all, regardless of how young or how old we are. God is there for us all the time. So we're going to pop this family, this father and son, into the nativity scene and see how we get on. There they are. They're in there. It's getting quite crowded down that bottom corner now, isn't it? Let's come back tomorrow and see what our next character role is. Do you like apples? I do. I like the juicy red kind, not the ones that have that sawdust texture, but the ones that can make a real mess when you eat them. Tonight's story is about a man who had an apple tree and the little boy who shares his name. This is Big and Little Nicholas. Everyone in the village knew strange old Nick. He lived all alone in his crooked little house, year in and year out. He wore the same clothes, a long reddish-brown cloak and a tall pointed hat that made his thin, gaunt body look even bigger. In the hottest summer and the coldest winter, he would walk around in his heavy boots. It was hardly surprising that the village children used to make fun of him, calling him Ridiculous Nicholas. They would run away laughing when he threatened them with his walking stick. But that was not the only way they teased him. In his garden stood the most wonderful apple tree in the village, which every year bore the sweetest fruit. It's a very rare old variety from some distant land, the village women used to say, gazing enviously over the garden fence. For the village boys, it was a test of courage to climb up the huge tree and pick some apples. Then Nick would come storming out of the house and try and catch them. One evening, in late autumn, a little boy failed to run away in time. He tried in vain to climb over the high garden fence while the furious Nick came nearer and nearer, waving his stick. Finally, the boy fell to the ground exhausted, and he covered his head with his hands in order to protect it. His shoulders were heaving. When old Nick saw this, he lowered his stick and helped the boy to his feet. "I'm not going to hurt you, you little devil," he growled, "but don't let me ever see you here again. I just don't understand why you think it's such fun to break branches and steal apples. Why do you do it?" "Because I want to be brave like everyone else," whispered the boy. "Otherwise they'll just keep laughing at me." The two of them looked at each other for a long time. Then the old man put out his hand and said, "My name's Nick." "I know," said the boy. "My name's Nick too." Then they both started laughing and sang Ridiculous Nicholas. "Instead of stealing an apple, would you like me to give you one?" asked Big Nick. Little Nick nodded and went into the house with him, and what he saw filled him with amazement. All four walls of the room were covered with shelves. On them stood jars of apple sauce, apple puree, apple juice, apple jam, apple compote, apple jelly. The old man crossed the room and opened the door to another room with more shelves on which stood rows upon row of neatly laid out apples. "But this is crazy," cried little Nick. "Who's going to eat them all?" Big Nick sadly shook his head. "I don't know. I've got no one now and nobody comes to see me, but I can't let these lovely apples rot, so take as many as you'd like." Little Nick picked a rosy-cheeked apple from the shelf. Thoughtfully he took a bite and then he suddenly grinned. "Listen, Big Nick, I've had an idea." 2 months later, if the villagers had looked out of their windows on Christmas Eve, they would have seen two strange figures. They were pulling a heavy sleigh through the cold winter night. No one saw them because everyone was sitting in their warm living rooms watching television. One figure was very tall and the other very small. They were both wearing long cloaks and tall pointed hats. They stopped in front of each house and took a little bag from the sleigh. In the bag were rosy-cheeked apples, a jar of apple puree or jam jelly, and some peanuts. They put the little bag outside the front door and then walked hand in hand to the next house. When the sleigh was empty, the two of them disappeared giggling into a garden that contained a huge apple tree whose branches were completely bare. Would you like to know who the two figures were? I think you can probably guess that they were Big and Little Nick. I like that story. I'm sure that you would never steal apples from someone else's tree, and you probably shouldn't go into strangers' homes either. But the story does remind us that sometimes we can have so much stuff that we don't know what to do with it. I think we should share what we have with those who don't have much at all, don't you? Don't you think everyone would be happier if we just had just enough and not too much and not too little? Anyway, I hope you have a really good night's rest and I shall see you tomorrow. Good night.